To understand why cryptocurrency was created, it is necessary to examine the historical and economic factors that led to its emergence. One of the most important triggers was the global financial crisis of 2008 and the resulting loss of trust in the banking system. In 2008, a worldwide financial collapse occurred that led to severe banking crises and the rescue of major financial institutions. In September 2008, Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy, causing the global financial system to come close to collapse. In response to the crisis, governments announced massive financial rescue packages to prevent banks from failing. A widely cited newspaper headline at the time stated that the chancellor was on the brink of a second bailout for banks. These events dramatically reduced public trust in the traditional banking system. People began to question the stability of financial institutions and the reliability of banks. Another major factor was criticism of the fiat money system and growing distrust in central banks. The creators of cryptocurrency openly criticized traditional fiat currencies. Fiat money, which is issued by governments, requires full trust in central banks to maintain its value. Bitcoin's creator wrote that people must trust central banks not to debase the currency, but historical experience shows that this trust has often been abused. Central banks have repeatedly reduced the value of money through their policies, such as excessive money printing that leads to inflation. This pattern has occurred many times throughout history. The weaknesses and opacity of the banking system were also a critical concern. In the traditional banking system, users are forced to entrust their money and transactions entirely to banks. The existing financial system requires people to trust banks to store and transfer money, even though banks hold only a fraction of reserves and lend out the rest, creating recurring credit bubbles. These bubbles pose serious risks to the economy. At the same time, banks and payment providers maintain full control over transactions, which limits financial privacy and increases the risk of data exposure. This opacity and centralized control were heavily criticized because they make the system vulnerable to abuse. As a result of these factors, a fundamentally new approach became necessary. There was a growing demand for a decentralized system that did not depend on a single authority. The idea behind Bitcoin emerged directly from this need. Its goal was to enable transactions without any central intermediary or trusted third party. In other words, it aimed to create a system where two parties could transact directly with each other electronically, without banks or governments acting as intermediaries. This system would rely on cryptographic proof and network consensus. Trust would no longer be placed in banks, but in mathematical algorithms and encryption. Thus, decentralized cryptocurrency was proposed as an alternative solution to the problems of traditional finance. Bitcoin's creation began with the publication of its foundational document. On October 31, 2008, an individual or group using the name Satoshi Nakamoto released a document titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. This white paper outlined the core principles of Bitcoin and described a network that could operate without relying on central banks or intermediaries. It stated that a purely peer-to-peer electronic cash system would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. To solve the problem of double spending, the system proposed the use of blockchain technology and proof-of-work mechanisms. At the time of publication, the true identity of Satoshi Nakamoto was unknown and remains unknown to this day. Bitcoin officially launched on January 3, 2009. On that day, the Genesis block, the first block in the Bitcoin blockchain, was created. Embedded within this block was a message taken from a newspaper headline reading that the chancellor was on the brink of a second bailout for banks. This message was included in the Coinbase field of the Genesis block. Observers believed this was a direct reference to government bailouts and a symbolic statement against the traditional banking system. It served as a clear indication that Bitcoin was intended as an alternative to centralized finance and repeated bank rescues. The first real Bitcoin transaction occurred on January 12, 2009. A developer named Hal Finney ran the first Bitcoin software and received 10 Bitcoins from Satoshi Nakamoto as a test transaction. This was the first successful transfer of Bitcoin and demonstrated that the system functioned as intended. The transaction was recorded in block number 170 and confirmed that the blockchain ledger updated correctly. Hal Finney, an active participant in the cypherpunk movement, became the first person to receive Bitcoin, marking a historic milestone. Over time, various experts, technologists, and economists have offered interpretations of why cryptocurrency was created and what it represents. Some experts describe cryptocurrency as a direct response to the 2008 financial crisis. They argue that crypto assets emerged from the depths of the global financial collapse as a reaction to the flaws of traditional finance. The failure of banks and the loss of public trust created the conditions for a system that allows direct exchange of value without intermediaries. Economists have also linked Bitcoin's creation to the crisis of trust that occurred between 2008 and 2009. Bitcoin was designed as a method of transferring value without relying on central banks or financial institutions at a time when trust in those entities had reached historic lows. The timing of Bitcoin's launch aligned precisely with this loss of confidence. Some researchers have taken a more critical view. They argue that while Bitcoin was presented as a response to distrust in banks and governments, it does not directly solve the root causes of the 2008 crisis, such as excessive leverage, complex derivatives, and fraud. Instead, Bitcoin created a parallel system operating outside traditional financial structures. According to this view, Bitcoin's design prioritizes resistance to regulation by avoiding centralized oversight. Others describe Bitcoin as a financial revolution. Some journalists and analysts have characterized cryptocurrency as one of the most significant changes in the history of money, enabling banking without banks and money without intermediaries. They argue that for the first time, financial transactions can occur without traditional institutions, allowing individuals to maintain direct control over their finances. Supporters often describe Bitcoin as the most important innovation since the Internet and as a tool that gives people genuine ownership over their finances. While some of these claims may be exaggerated, they reflect a broader perception that cryptocurrency represents a new era in financial thinking. In summary, cryptocurrency was created in response to systemic failure, loss of trust, and the limitations of centralized financial systems. It was designed to provide transparency, decentralization, and an alternative model for storing and transferring value.